I almost didn't go up there at all. It had been 4 months since my husband passed, and the attic was the one place in the house I hadn't touched. Every other room, I'd managed. I'd folded his clothes into neat boxes for Goodwill, washed his coffee mug and put it back in the cabinet like it was still waiting for him, even cleaned out his side of the bathroom without letting myself fall apart. But the attic was different. The attic was where he kept everything he called important but not urgent. Old tax returns. His grandfather's tools. Boxes of things he swore he'd sort through someday. Someday never came for him. So now it was mine. My sister had offered to help. She'd called twice that week, saying she'd drive up from Portland and we could do it together, make a day of it, order Thai food after. I told her I was fine. I told her I needed to do it myself. I think what I actually meant was that I wasn't ready for anyone to watch me fall apart in real time. So on a Saturday morning in late October, I pulled down the attic ladder by myself, climbed up with a box of garbage bags and a cup of coffee, and started going through the life my husband had left behind. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Old sporting equipment, a broken printer he'd meant to recycle. 3 identical sets of jumper cables because he kept forgetting he already owned them. I smiled at that. He was always doing things like that, buying duplicates, losing track of small things, certain he'd misplaced something only to find 2 of them. It was one of the things that used to drive me crazy. Standing there in the dusty half-light with garbage bags around my ankles, I would have given anything to tease him about it one more time. I was almost done. I was ready to call it a morning and go downstairs and cry into my coffee when I noticed the box in the far corner. It was a plain, brown moving box, the kind you get for free from the liquor store, taped shut with several layers of packing tape. It had no label. Every other box up there had his handwriting on it. Camping, taxes, 2017, 2019, mom's stuff, but this one had nothing. Just tape, applied carefully, deliberately, like someone wanted to make sure it stayed closed. I sat down on an old trunk and looked at it for a long moment. Then I got up and opened it. Inside was a shoebox. And inside the shoebox was a phone. Not his regular phone. I still had that downstairs, locked in the kitchen drawer, because I couldn't bring myself to cancel the plan. This was an older model, a prepaid phone, the kind you buy at a drugstore. The battery was dead. I sat there, holding it in both hands like it was something fragile, turning it over, looking for anything written on it. There was nothing. I told myself it was probably nothing. People keep old phones. People have second phones for work, for privacy, for a dozen ordinary reasons. I set it aside and kept going through the box. Underneath the shoebox was a manila envelope, thick with papers. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a lease agreement. An apartment in a neighborhood 20 minutes from our house. Signed by my husband. Dated 3 years ago. I read it twice. Then a third time. The address meant nothing to me. The apartment number meant nothing to me. But his signature at the bottom was exactly the way it always looked, the looping H, the trailing off at the end, the way I had watched him sign birthday cards and Christmas cards and, once, the deed to our house. My hands were steady. I don't know why. I think part of me had already understood something, even if my mind hadn't caught up yet. I kept going. Behind the lease was a stack of printed bank statements, a different account, not one I recognized. Transactions going back 3 years. Regular deposits every month, always the same amount, always on the first. Withdrawals for grocery stores, a pediatrician's office, a pharmacy, a daycare center called Little Explorers Learning, a daycare center. I sat there on that trunk in the attic of the house my husband and I had bought together, and I read that statement 4 times, and I did not cry. I didn't scream. I didn't knock anything over. I just sat very still and felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and load-bearing, the way you imagine a building feels the moment before it starts to lean. There was one more thing in the envelope. A photograph, printed on regular copy paper, slightly faded. A little girl, maybe 2 years old, sitting in a plastic kiddie pool in what looked like a small apartment courtyard. She was laughing at whoever was taking the picture. She had dark eyes and her hair was coming out of 2 tiny pigtails. She had my husband's smile. I had seen that smile every day for 9 years. I knew it better than I knew my own reflection. I put everything back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the box. I carried the box downstairs, set it on the kitchen table, and sat across from it like it was someone I needed to think about before I spoke. Then I went and got the dead phone and plugged it into a charger I had in the junk drawer. I waited. It took 20 minutes. When it finally turned on, there was no lock screen. He had never set a passcode. I had always teased him about that, said he was a security nightmare, said anyone could pick up his phone and read his whole life. He used to laugh and say he had nothing to hide. The phone had one contact saved. Just a first name. Claire. There were 3 years of text messages. I won't describe all of them. I couldn't if I tried. My vision kept blurring and I had to keep setting the phone down and breathing. But I read enough to understand the shape of it. They had met through work, through a project that had brought my husband's company into contact with a small nonprofit where Claire was the office manager. She had just gotten out of a long relationship. She was pregnant when they met, not by him, by her ex who had left when he found out. My husband had, according to the texts, according to his own words, been there for her. And then, at some point, he had become more than that. The little girl in the photograph was named Rosie. She was not his biological daughter. But the texts made clear that he had been paying their rent for 3 years, that he had been at the hospital when Rosie had her tonsils out, that Claire called him when the pipes burst and when Rosie's daycare closed for a week and she didn't know how she was going to manage work. He had been a quiet, constant presence in their lives. A second life. A parallel life. Running alongside our own like 2 trains on adjacent tracks, never touching, invisible to me. The last text in the thread was dated 11 days before my husband died, Claire asking how he was doing after his diagnosis. My husband writing back, trying to figure out how to do right by everyone. I don't know if I'm capable of it. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. Then I heard the front door open. My daughter came in dropping her backpack on the floor, the way she always did, the way I had asked her not to do approximately 400 times. She's 23, home between jobs, staying with me for a few months while she figured out her next step. We had been doing fine, mostly. The grief had made us both quieter, more careful with each other. She had been good in the weeks after her father died, practical, present, making sure I ate, sitting with me on the couch, watching television without either of us needing to talk about it. She stopped when she saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong?" I looked at her. I looked at the box on the table. I looked at her again. "Come sit down," I said. She sat. She looked at the box, she looked at me. I watched her notice the phone, the envelope, the shoebox. I watched her start to understand, the way young people do, faster than they should have to. "What is that?" she asked. "I found it in the attic." "What's in it?" I told her. Not all of it, not right away. I gave it to her slowly, watching her face, the way you lower someone into cold water instead of pushing them. The phone, the lease, the bank account, the photograph. She didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "How long?" "At least 3 years. Maybe more." She pushed back from the table and stood up and walked to the kitchen window and stood there with her back to me. I waited. "He had a whole other family," she said. "He had a whole other family and none of us knew." "She's not biologically his," I said. "But he was supporting them. He was present in their lives." She turned around. Her face was something I didn't have a word for. "Does that make it better?" she said. "No," I said. "I don't think it does." She sat back down. We stayed there for a long time. At some point, she started to cry, quietly, without asking me for anything, and I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, and we sat like that until it was dark outside. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the phone and the envelope and the photograph of a little girl laughing in a kiddie pool. I thought about Claire. I thought about what her life must have looked like from the inside. A single mother, a man who showed up and stayed, who paid her rent and came to the hospital and answered her calls. I thought about whether she knew he was married. The text didn't make that clear. There was no evidence that she did, and no evidence that she didn't. I thought about what it would mean for her now, 4 months into his absence, whether she knew why the rent had stopped, whether she'd been told anything at all. I thought about Rosie. Rosie, who was almost 3 years old, who had gone to a daycare called Little Explorers Learning, who had a man who came around and fixed things and sat at the hospital with her mother and who was now simply gone. Rosie, who would not remember him and who would also not know to miss him. I was not sure which of those was worse. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I found my daughter sitting at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand. I stopped in the doorway. "You're reading them," I said. She looked up. Something moved across her face, not quite shame, but something adjacent to it. "I wanted to understand," she said. "I know," I said. "Put it down." She set it on the table. We looked at each other. "He wasn't a good person, Mom." "He was a complicated person," I said. "Which is not the same thing, and also doesn't excuse anything. He lied to you for years." "Yes. He had a hole." She stopped. Started again. "How are you not furious?" "I am furious," I said. "I'm also something else. I'm still figuring out what." She was quiet. "I know you loved him," I said. "I know he was a good father to you. I know that those two things feel like they can't both be true right now, but they are. People are big enough to do something very wrong and also love their children genuinely. He was both things. He was a lot of things." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I'm not there yet." "You don't have to be," I said. "You have time." I made coffee. We sat together, not talking. After a while, she asked me what I was going to do. I had been thinking about that since 2 in the morning. "I'm going to find them," I said. "Claire and Rosie." "Why?" I looked at my coffee cup. "Because Rosie's rent stopped 4 months ago. Because a man who was part of their lives just disappeared and no one has explained it to them. Because there is a child out there who deserves to know." I paused. Not everything at once, but something. "That could go very badly," my daughter said. "It could," I agreed. "She might be angry. Claire. She might blame you somehow. Maybe. Or she might not even care. He might have been just one piece of a bigger picture for her. Also possible." She looked at me carefully. "You're going to do it anyway." "I'm going to do it anyway." I spent 2 days sitting with it before I went. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I wanted to go for the right reasons. I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to stand at that door and say something I couldn't take back. I wanted to check myself. Was I going to be honest? Was I going to be kind? Was I going to walk in there and shatter something that a small child had built her understanding of the world around? I wrote a letter to Rosie. I wrote it when my daughter was asleep, at the kitchen table with a glass of wine I didn't drink. I wrote it knowing she was too young to read it now, knowing her mother would have to decide whether to give it to her at all, knowing I might never know what she decided. I wrote it because I needed to, because there were things that needed to go somewhere, and putting them on paper and into her hands felt like the only honest thing I could do. I don't remember exactly what I wrote. I know I told her that her mother was loved. I know I told her that the man who came around and paid the bills and showed up when things were hard, that there were people in his life who would want her to know he was not a bad man. He was a man who tried to be 2 things at once and could not hold it. I know I told her that none of it was her fault. I know I told her she was wanted, that whatever else was complicated. She had been wanted by the man who chose to show up. I folded it and put it in an envelope and wrote her name on the front. Then I drove to the address on the lease. It was a 2nd-floor apartment in a beige complex with a small parking lot and a row of mailboxes out front. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. Then I got out, walked up the stairs, and knocked. She answered the door in a sweatshirt and jeans. She was younger than I expected, mid-20s, tired-looking in the way new parents always look tired, hair pulled back, a dish towel in her hand. Behind her, I could hear a children's show playing on a television somewhere. She looked at me. I could see the moment she started to understand. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," I said. "I'm not angry at you. I just needed you to know that he passed away 4 months ago. In case no one told you." She stood very still. "I know what he was to you," I said. "I'm not going to pretend it was nothing. He made a choice that cost both of us something. But there's a little girl in there, and I don't think she should grow up not knowing that someone who cared about her is gone. I wrote her a letter. You can do whatever you want with it. Throw it away if you need to. But I wanted her to have it." I held out the envelope. Claire looked at it for a long time. Then she took it. She didn't say thank you. I didn't expect her to. She just held it against her chest and looked at me with an expression I will not try to describe. Because I don't think I have the right words for what two women look like when they are both standing in the wreckage of the same man's choices and choosing, in that moment, not to take it out on each other. I walked back down the stairs. I got in my car. I drove home. My daughter was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. She had her knees tucked to her chest and a cup of tea going cold in her hands. She watched me park and get out and walk up the path. "How did it go?" she asked. I sat down next to her on the porch steps. The October air was cold and still, and the neighbor's maple tree had gone completely red while none of us were paying attention. "She took the letter," I said. My daughter nodded. We sat together. "I still don't understand how you did that," she said finally. "I'm not sure I could have." "Maybe you could," I said. "Given time." "Do you feel better?" I thought about it honestly. "I feel complete," I said. "Not better. Not the same. I feel like I did the last thing there was to do. And now I have to figure out what comes after." She put her head on my shoulder. I put my arm around her. We sat there until the cold got too much, and then we went inside together, into the house that still held the shape of a man who had been too many things at once, a man I had loved truly and who had not loved me simply. And I thought about how grief is never just one color, how it changes as you learn more, how the person you're mourning shifts like a painting in different light. I didn't forgive him that night. I'm not sure I've forgiven him now. But I chose to carry him fully, not just the version I'd been given, but the whole complicated truth of him. I don't know if that's grace. I don't know if it's just what surviving looks like. Maybe, in the end, they're the same thing.